Abigail Brennan arrived in Copper Bend, Montana, in a torn blue dress, her left cheek swollen purple. 14 days from Boston, 14 days without a full meal. In her pocket, 9 cents, and a letter from Malcolm Pritchard, a man who promised her a future. But Malcolm wasn't there to meet her. Instead, a cowboy with eyes cold as steel dismounted his horse and said, "You're looking for the wrong man, lady." The stagecoach pulled away in a cloud of dust, leaving her standing alone on the main street of a town that looked like it had been carved from disappointment and hard winters. September 1876. The Montana sky stretched endless above her, indifferent to her arrival, indifferent to her survival. Abigail pressed her hand against her left side where the ribs hadn't healed right. 2 months since James Hartford had put his fist there, 2 months since she'd learned that love, when it soured, could taste like blood in your mouth. But she couldn't think about Boston now. Boston was ash and memory. Montana was supposed to be different. The cowboy stood 10 feet away, studying her with the kind of assessment a man gives a horse he's thinking about buying. Tall, maybe 6'1", black hair that needed cutting. A scar ran from his right ear down to his collar, white against sun-bronzed skin. He wore a faded work shirt, leather vest, and a revolver that sat on his hip like it belonged there. "I'm looking for Malcolm Pritchard," Abigail said, forcing her voice steady. "He sent for me. We're to be married." The cowboy's expression didn't change. "Malcolm's gone." 2 words, delivered flat, like he was commenting on the weather. Gone where? That's the question, isn't it? A door opened across the street. An older woman emerged from what looked like a general store, wiping her hands on an apron. Chinese, Abigail realized. The woman's eyes moved from the cowboy to Abigail and back again, reading something in the scene that Abigail herself didn't yet understand. "Lucas Mercer," the woman called out. "That girl looks like she's about to fall over." The cowboy, Lucas, turned his head slightly, but kept his eyes on Abigail. "Not my problem, Grace. Everything in this town is your problem, whether you like it or not." Grace Chen crossed the street with quick, efficient steps. Up close, Abigail could see the woman was perhaps 30, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "When did you eat last, girl?" Abigail tried to remember. The stagecoach station in Billings. A piece of hard bread. Yesterday morning, maybe, or the day before. Time had started blurring somewhere around the Wyoming border. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not fine. You're half-starved and Malcolm Pritchard is 3 days gone, which means you're in a situation." Grace looked at Lucas. "You going to help or just stand there like a statue? I'm not responsible for Malcolm's mail-order disasters." "Nobody said you were responsible. I'm saying she needs help, and you're standing right here." Lucas Mercer's jaw tightened. For a moment, Abigail thought he might simply walk away, leave her standing there with her 9 cents and her broken ribs and her future crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. But then his eyes shifted to her face, lingered on the bruise, and something flickered in that gray gaze. Not pity, something harder than pity. "There's a room behind the church," he said. "Reverend Whitfield usually takes in strays. Grace will show you." He turned toward his horse. "Wait," Abigail said. "You know Malcolm. Where would he go? When will he be back?" Lucas stopped but didn't turn around. His shoulders rose and fell with a breath that looked like it cost him something. When he finally looked back at her, his face was carefully empty. "Malcolm Pritchard and I aren't friends, Miss Brennan. We're not even friendly. If he told you he was a man of his word, he lied about that too." He swung up into his saddle with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime on horseback. "Welcome to Montana." Then he was gone, riding south out of town, leaving nothing but dust and questions. Grace touched Abigail's elbow. "Come on, let's get some food in you before you think too hard about what you've gotten yourself into." The restaurant was small, 6 tables packed into a space that smelled like coffee and frying meat. Grace sat Abigail down at the back table and disappeared into the kitchen. Through the window, Abigail could see the main street of Copper Bend, a handful of wooden buildings, A saloon called the Silver Dollar, a bank, a livery stable, mountains in the distance, already white-capped with early snow. This was supposed to be her new life, this collection of strangers and structures. Malcolm's letters had painted a different picture, a thriving town, a successful business, a man ready for a family. She'd read those letters so many times the paper had grown soft at the creases. She'd believed every word because she'd needed to believe them. Grace returned with a plate of eggs, bacon, and bread, still warm from the oven. She set it down without ceremony. "Eat." Abigail picked up the fork. Her hands were shaking. She tried to make them stop, but the trembling ran deeper than her muscles, all the way down to something broken at her core. The first bite of eggs tasted like salvation. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me yet. Food's easy. The rest of it's harder." Grace sat down across from her, poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot she'd brought from the kitchen. "How much did Malcolm tell you about Copper Bend?" "He said it was a good town, growing. He said he owned a store. He owns half of a failing store, and he owes money to the wrong people." Grace's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was discussing the price of flour. "3 days ago he left in the middle of the night. No one's seen him since." The eggs turned to ash in Abigail's mouth. She forced herself to swallow. "Why didn't anyone tell me? There must have been a way to send word. By the time anyone figured out you were coming, you were already on your way." Grace wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. Malcolm wasn't exactly the type to share his plans, or his debts. Abigail set down her fork. The room tilted slightly, then steadied. She'd survived worse than this. She'd survived her father hanging himself in the study while she was teaching Latin to bored daughters of Boston merchants. She'd survived her mother's slow death from consumption. She'd survived James Hartford and his fists and his threats, when she wouldn't spread her legs to pay off his gambling debts with her body. She could survive this. "I need work," she said. "I can teach. I can sew. I can keep books." Grace studied her for a long moment. "You can wash dishes." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Abigail said, "I can wash dishes. 6 days a week, 4 hours a day, 75 cents a week." Grace paused. "The room behind the church is free if Reverend Whitfield agrees, but you'll need money for everything else." 75 cents a week. It was nothing. It was barely enough to survive. But it was more than 9 cents and hope. "When do I start?" "Soon as you finish eating." Grace stood up. "And Abigail? Lucas Mercer is a hard man, but he's not a cruel one. He lost his wife and daughter 3 years back. Comanche raid while he was out hunting. Came home to ashes and graves. He doesn't let people close anymore, so don't take it personal when he looks at you like you're already dead." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through Abigail's understanding of the cold-eyed cowboy who'd dismissed her so easily. She thought about the way he'd looked at her bruise, the flicker of something in his expression before he locked it away. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I watched 3 other girls come through here in the last 2 years looking for Malcolm Pritchard or men like him. All 3 disappeared within a month. I couldn't do anything about it then. Maybe I can do something now." Grace walked back to the kitchen, leaving Abigail alone with a plate of cooling eggs, and a growing sense that she'd stepped into something far more dangerous than a failed mail-order arrangement. She ate mechanically, forcing down every bite. Her body needed fuel more than her mind needed comfort. When she was done, she found Grace in the kitchen, up to her elbows in soapy water. There was already a stack of plates waiting. Abigail rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The Reverend Thomas Whitfield was not what Abigail expected. He was thin as a fence post, with white hair and a face carved by time and weather into something resembling kindness. His left eye was clouded with blindness, but the right one saw clearly enough. "Miss Brennan," he said when Grace brought her to the small white church at the edge of town, "Grace tells me you're in need of a room." "Yes, sir. I can pay. Not much, but something. The room's free." "It's barely more than a closet anyway." He studied her with that one good eye. "You're the girl Malcolm sent for." "I am. And now Malcolm's gone and you're here alone." He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already known. "This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you that the Lord works in mysterious ways. But I suspect you've heard enough platitudes to last you a lifetime." Despite everything, Abigail felt her mouth quirk upward. "Yes, sir. The room's out back. There's a bed, a washstand, and a window that looks out over the cemetery. Not exactly cheerful, but it's private, and the door locks from the inside." He gestured for her to follow him. "I'll give you one piece of advice, though. Don't trust easy in Copper Bend. This town's got secrets, and some of them bite." The room was exactly as he'd described. Small, plain, clean. The bed had a quilt that looked handmade, patches of different fabrics sewn together with careful stitches. The window did indeed overlook the cemetery, a collection of wooden crosses and stone markers on a hillside dotted with prairie grass. "It's perfect," Abigail said. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Week from now you might wish you'd taken your 9 cents and bought a ticket back to Boston." But Boston wasn't an option. It had never really been an option. That night, Abigail lay in the narrow bed and listened to the sounds of Montana settling into darkness. Wind against the walls. Distant coyotes. The creak of old wood adjusting to the temperature drop. Her ribs ached where James had broken them. Her hands were raw from washing dishes in Grace's scalding water. Her future stretched out before her like an unmarked trail through hostile country. She thought about Lucas Mercer and his dead family, about Malcolm Pritchard and his debts, about 3 girls who'd disappeared, and Grace's careful warning. None of it made sense yet, but Abigail had learned that truth revealed itself slowly, like photographs developing in chemical baths. She'd also learned that survival was a skill you practiced every day until it became instinct. Sleep came in fragments, dreams mixing with memory. Her father's study. The rope. James's face above hers, his breath thick with whiskey and rage. The train west. The promise of something different, something better. And now this, Montana, a town called Copper Bend. A room that smelled like cedar and old prayers. Morning came cold and clear. Abigail dressed in her other dress, which wasn't much better than the torn one, but at least lacked visible bloodstains. She braided her hair and pinned it up, then made her way to Grace's restaurant. The sun was just breaking over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Grace was already in the kitchen, working on what looked like enough food to feed half the town. "You're early," Grace said without looking up. "Where I'm from, early means on time. Where you're from sounds exhausting." But there was approval in Grace's voice. "There's coffee on the stove. Help yourself, then start on those dishes from last night." The routine was simple, repetitive, almost meditative. Wash, rinse, dry, stack. Abigail's hands moved through the motions while her mind wandered. She thought about teaching positions she'd never have now, about the small apartment in Boston she'd shared with her mother before the consumption took her, about the way James had smiled when he'd asked her to marry him, before she'd learned that a smile could be the mask a predator wore. Around mid-morning, the door opened and Lucas Mercer walked in. He nodded to Grace. The usual. Grace didn't respond, just started cracking eggs into a skillet. Lucas took a seat at the counter, his back to the kitchen, where Abigail stood wrist-deep in dishwater. For a moment she considered staying quiet, invisible. But invisibility was a habit she'd practiced too long in Boston. Montana was supposed to be different. She dried her hands and walked out into the dining area. "Mr. Mercer." He turned, surprise flickering across his face before the mask came back down. "Miss Brennan? I wanted to thank you for suggesting the room at the church." "Wasn't my idea," was Grace's. "You stayed long enough to see it arranged." His jaw worked like he was chewing words he didn't want to spit out. "You looked like you needed help." I do." She took a breath, steadied herself. "I need to understand what happened to Malcolm. If he's coming back. If there's any chance of the arrangement, he promised. Lucas looked at her for a long moment. In the morning light, she could see the gray of his eyes more clearly. Storm-colored, weather-beaten. The eyes of a man who'd seen things he couldn't forget. "Malcolm Pritchard is not coming back, Miss Brennan. If he has any sense at all, he's halfway to California by now." "Why?" "Because he owes money to Silas Drummond. And men who owe Silas money tend to disappear in one of two ways. They run or they die. Malcolm chose running." Grace set a plate of eggs and bacon in front of Lucas. "Leave it alone, Lucas," she asked. "And I'm telling you to leave it alone." But Abigail wasn't going to leave it alone. Not when her entire future had just evaporated like morning fog. "Who's Silas Drummond?" Lucas picked up his fork but didn't eat. He seemed to be weighing something, deciding how much truth she could handle. Finally he said, "Silas Drummond owns the saloon, the bank, and half the land around Copper Bend. 5 years ago he killed a farmer over a property dispute. I testified against him. He served 2 years in territorial prison, got out last spring. And Malcolm owed him money." Malcolm owed everyone money, but Silas has a particular way of collecting debts. He's patient, methodical, and he never forgets. Lucas finally took a bite of eggs. "You should leave, Miss Brennan. Get on the next stage east. Montana's no place for you." The words stung more than they should have. "You don't know anything about me. I know you came here expecting something Malcolm Pritchard couldn't deliver. I know you've got a bruise on your face that's a week old at least. I know you're washing dishes for 75 cents a week in a town where 3 women have vanished in 2 years. He met her eyes. "I know you're in trouble, whether you realize it yet or not. Then help me understand the trouble. Stop talking around it and tell me what's really happening here." The door opened before Lucas could respond. A man walked in, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with graying brown hair and a face that would have been handsome if not for the coldness in his eyes. He wore a tailored suit, expensive by Montana standards, and moved with the confidence of someone who knew he owned everything he looked at. "Grace," he said pleasantly, "I smell bacon." "Kitchen's closed, Silas." "For me, surely not." His gaze slid past Grace, past Lucas, and landed on Abigail. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that made Abigail think of wolves and winter. "Well now, you must be Malcolm's girl. I'd heard you arrived." Abigail felt Lucas tense beside her, though he didn't move. "I'm Silas Drummond," the man continued. "I was a business associate of Malcolm's. Terrible shame about his departure. Left a lot of loose ends." He took a step closer. "You and I should talk, Miss Brennan, about Malcolm's debts, about what you might owe." "She doesn't owe you anything," Lucas said quietly. Silas's smile widened. "Lucas Mercer, still playing hero. How's that worked out for you so far?" He turned back to Abigail. "Malcolm told me all about you. Boston girl, teacher, father who couldn't handle the pressure. Malcolm said you were desperate, willing to do whatever it took for a fresh start. Is that true, Miss Brennan? Are you willing to do whatever it takes?" The words were a violation. Malcolm's private letters turned into weapons. Abigail felt her face flush, anger burning through the fear. "I don't know what Malcolm told you, but I don't owe him anything. And I certainly don't owe you." "Oh, but you do. You see, Malcolm used you as collateral on a loan, said you'd be arriving, said you'd work off what he owed. Household services, he called it. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement." Lucas stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "Get out, Silas." "This is Grace's establishment, not yours. I'm making it my business." For a moment the two men stared at each other, and Abigail could feel the weight of history between them, violence barely contained, old grudges and fresh wounds. Silas broke eye contact first, but the smile never left his face. "Enjoy your breakfast, Lucas. Miss Brennan, we'll talk soon. I always collect what I'm owed." He tipped his hat to Grace and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Grace said, "You shouldn't have done that. Someone had to. And now Silas knows she matters to you. She doesn't matter to me. She's just a woman who got dealt a bad hand. Grace made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. Keep telling yourself that. Abigail found her voice. What did he mean about collateral? About me working off Malcolm's debt? Lucas sat back down, but he'd lost interest in his breakfast. Silas is creative with his collections. He's been bringing in women, girls mostly, promising them work or husbands. Then he ships them north to mining camps in Canada, sells them. Some go willing, most don't. The ones who fight disappear. The room tilted again, worse this time. Abigail gripped the counter to steady herself. You're saying Malcolm sold me? I'm saying Malcolm made promises to Silas that involved you. Whether he intended to follow through or just used your name to buy time, I don't know. But Silas thinks you're his property now. I'm not anyone's property. I know that. Grace knows that. But Silas doesn't care what we know. Lucas pushed his plate away. That's why you need to leave. Today. I'll pay for your ticket. Just get out of Copper Bend before Silas decides to collect. Abigail looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw the scar, the gray eyes, the way his hands rested on the counter, relaxed but ready. This was a man who'd lost everything and decided the safest response was to care about nothing. But he was offering to buy her ticket out, which meant some part of him, however small, still cared about something. No, she said. No? I didn't come to Montana to run. I came because I had nowhere else to go. Boston's not an option. Neither is anywhere else east. So I'm staying. I'll work off whatever Malcolm claimed I owed. I'll find another way. She straightened, ignoring the pain in her ribs. But I'm not running. Lucas studied her like he was trying to solve a problem with no good solution. Finally he said, You're stubborn. I'm practical. Stubborn, he repeated. But something in his expression had shifted. Not quite approval, but something close. Fine. But stay away from Silas. Don't talk to him. Don't look at him. If you see him coming, you cross the street. I can handle myself. That's what the other 3 girls probably thought. The words hit home. Abigail remembered Grace's warning. 3 disappeared in 2 years. Then help me, she said. You know this town. You know Silas. Help me figure out what happened to them. Maybe if we understand what he's doing, we can stop him. We? Lucas shook his head. There's no we, Miss Brennan. I'm a rancher trying to mind my business. You're a woman who stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. Then why are you still sitting here? The question hung in the air between them. Lucas didn't have an answer, or if he did, he wasn't willing to share it. He stood up, dropped coins on the counter for his uneaten breakfast, and headed for the door. Stay out of trouble, he said, without looking back. Then he was gone. Grace came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Well, that was something. He thinks I should leave. He's probably right. Grace paused. But you're not going to, are you? No? Good. Because I've been trying to figure out what happened to those girls for 2 years, and I need help. Someone Silas doesn't already have his hooks in. Grace pulled out a chair and sat down. The first one was named Clara, 17, came from Ohio. Malcolm placed the order. She disappeared 3 weeks after arrival. Sheriff said she probably ran off, but Clara left everything behind, her clothes, her mother's Bible, everything. And the second, Mary, 22, from Illinois. Lasted a month. Same story. Malcolm arranged it, girl vanished, sheriff did nothing. And the third? That one's different. Her name was Catherine. She didn't come for Malcolm. She came for a man named Wade Prescott, but Wade works for Silas, and Catherine's gone too. Abigail felt pieces clicking together in her mind, forming a picture she didn't like. So Malcolm was working for Silas, using mail-order bride arrangements to bring women here. That's my guess, but I can't prove it. And even if I could, who would I tell? The sheriff drinks at Silas's saloon every night. The mayor owes Silas money. Half the town council's in his pocket. Lucas testified against him once. And look what that cost him. Grace's voice was soft. Anna and Lily didn't die in a random Comanche raid. Silas arranged it. Everyone knows it. Nobody can prove it. The horror of it settled over Abigail like a heavy blanket. Lucas knows this. Lucas suspects, but suspicion isn't proof, and revenge isn't justice. Grace stood up, which is why we need to be smart. We need evidence. We need to understand where those girls went and how to stop it from happening again, starting with finding Malcolm, if he's still alive. That night, Abigail couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow bed behind the church, listening to the wind and thinking about Clara and Mary and Catherine. 3 women who'd come west looking for something better. 3 women who'd found something worse. She thought about Lucas Mercer and his dead family, about the kind of man who'd testify against someone like Silas Drummond, knowing what it might cost him, about the way he'd stood up in the restaurant, putting himself between her and danger, even though he claimed not to care. Around midnight, she heard footsteps outside her window, slow, deliberate. Someone was walking through the cemetery. Abigail slipped out of bed and moved to the window, staying to the side where she couldn't be seen. In the moonlight, she could make out a figure standing among the graves. Tall, male. After a moment, he crouched down near 2 markers close together. Lucas. He stayed there for nearly an hour, not moving, just sitting with his dead. When he finally stood and walked away, Abigail saw his face in profile. The expression there wasn't grief exactly. It was something harder, something that looked like guilt carved into flesh. She understood then why he'd told her to leave, not because he didn't care, but because he'd already lost everyone he'd allowed himself to care about, and he couldn't survive losing anyone else. But Abigail wasn't Anna. She wasn't Lily. She was a woman who'd survived her father's suicide, her mother's death, and James Hartford's fists. She'd come to Montana with 9 cents and a failed promise, and she wasn't about to let that be the end of her story. The next morning, she asked Grace, where would Malcolm have kept his things? If he had a room, papers, anything? He rented a room above the store. Why? Because if Malcolm was working for Silas, there might be evidence, letters, records, something that proves the connection. Grace studied her. That's breaking and entering. That's investigating. The sheriff wouldn't see it that way. The sheriff works for Silas. Abigail dried her hands on her apron. Are you going to help me or not? Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. And it was the first real smile Abigail had seen from her. Midnight. Meet me at the back door of the store and wear dark clothes. The day passed slowly. Abigail washed dishes, served coffee to miners and ranchers, and tried not to think about what she was planning. Breaking into Malcolm's room was risky. If they were caught, the sheriff would have no choice but to arrest them, regardless of who paid his salary. But risk was something Abigail had learned to measure differently in the past few months. Boston had taught her that safety was an illusion, that respectability could crumble in an instant, that the only person you could truly rely on was yourself. Around noon, Lucas came in again. He took the same seat at the counter, ordered the same breakfast. This time, Abigail brought him his coffee. Thank you, he said, surprised. You're welcome. She paused. I'm sorry about your family. His hand tightened around the coffee cup. Grace told you. She thought I should know why you're so determined to keep everyone at a distance. It's not personal. Everything's personal, Mr. Mercer. That's what makes it hurt. He looked up at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time since she'd arrived in Copper Bend, she saw past the wall he'd built, saw the man underneath, the one who sat with ghosts in a cemetery at midnight, the one who testified against killers even when it cost him everything. You're not leaving, are you? He said. No. Then you're a fool. Probably. She refilled his coffee. But I'm a fool who's still breathing. That counts for something. He almost smiled. Almost. Yeah, I suppose it does. That night, Abigail met Grace at the back door of the general store exactly at midnight. Grace had a key, which she explained in a whisper. Malcolm gave me a spare when he first moved in. For emergencies. Does he know you still have it? Malcolm doesn't know a lot of things. The staircase leading to the second floor was narrow and dark. Grace led the way with a small lantern, keeping the light low. The door to Malcolm's room wasn't locked. Inside, moonlight through a single window illuminated a space that looked like someone had left in a hurry. Drawers hung open, clothes scattered on the floor, a desk in the corner with papers strewn across its surface. "He left fast," Grace murmured. Abigail moved to the desk and began sorting through the papers, bills, receipts, letters in handwriting she didn't recognize. Most of it was mundane, the paperwork of a man running a failing business. But then, at the bottom of a drawer, she found a leather-bound journal. She opened it carefully. The pages were filled with Malcolm's handwriting, entries dated over the past 2 years. She flipped to the most recent entries, squinting in the dim light. September 10th, 1876. S. demanding payment. Need more time. Told him about the girl from Boston. September 12th, 1876. S. agreed to extension. Says the Boston girl will cover part of the debt if she's suitable. Asked for photograph. Sent the one from her second letter. September 15th, 1876. S. approved. Says she'll do, wants her delivered directly to the Silver Dollar upon arrival. Standard arrangement. Standard arrangement. Abigail's stomach turned. She flipped back further, finding more entries, more names. Clara, Mary, Catherine. Each one marked with a date of arrival and a date of transfer. Each transfer noted with a payment that reduced Malcolm's debt to Silas. "Grace," she said quietly, "I found it." Grace came over, read over her shoulder, her face hardened with each line. "This is what we needed. Evidence." "It's more than that." Abigail turned to an entry from 3 months ago, June 14th, 1876. "Catherine transfer delayed. W says she's fighting. S handling it personally. Expect completion by week's end." "W is Wade Prescott," Grace said. "And completion means—" "It means Catherine didn't go willingly. It means they forced her." Abigail kept reading, her horror growing with each entry. "There are 6 names here, Grace. 6 women. The 3 we know about, and 3 more." "Who are the other 3? Abigail read the names aloud. "Elizabeth Hayes, Maria Santos, and—" She stopped, her voice catching. The last name on the list was dated just 2 weeks ago. "Sarah Drummond." "Drummond," Grace repeated. "As in Silas's last name. But why would he be trafficking someone with his own name?" "Unless it's not trafficking." Grace took the journal, flipped through more pages. "Look at the payments. Every transfer lists an amount paid to Malcolm, but this one doesn't. It just says resolved." Abigail felt cold realization dawn. Sarah was someone he wanted to disappear. Family? A wife? Or someone who knew too much? The sound of footsteps on the stairs froze them both. Heavy boots, multiple people. Grace blew out the lantern. They had maybe seconds before whoever was coming reached the door. The window was too high to jump from without breaking something. The only way out was through the door, which would mean confronting whoever was coming up. Abigail grabbed the journal, shoved it inside her dress. Grace moved to the side of the door, picked up a heavy candlestick from a shelf. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. The door opened. Lucas Mercer stepped through, followed by an older man Abigail recognized as Reverend Whitfield. Both men stopped when they saw the women standing in the darkness. "What in God's name?" Lucas started. "Keep your voice down," Grace hissed. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question. We're investigating. You're breaking the law." "The law's already broken in this town." Grace set down the candlestick. "What are you doing here, Lucas?" Lucas glanced at Reverend Whitfield, some silent communication passing between them. "Same thing you are, looking for proof." "Of what?" "Of what happened to Sarah Drummond." The name hung in the air between them. Abigail stepped forward, pulling the journal from her dress. "Sarah's name is in here, along with 5 others. Malcolm was keeping records of every woman Silas trafficked." Lucas took the journal, angled it toward the moonlight to read. His face went stone still as he scanned the entries. When he looked up, his eyes had gone cold in a way that made Abigail think of winter and wolves and men who decided they had nothing left to lose. Sarah was Silas's niece, Reverend Whitfield said quietly, 17 years old. She came to me 6 weeks ago, said her uncle was trying to force her into something, wouldn't say what. I tried to help, tried to find a way to get her out of town safely. Then she disappeared. Silas killed her, Grace said. It wasn't a question. Or sold her so far north she might as well be dead. Lucas closed the journal, handed it back to Abigail. This is evidence. Real evidence. We take this to the territorial marshal. The marshal's 300 miles away, Grace interrupted, and by the time he gets here, this journal will have disappeared, and we'll all have accidents. Then what do you suggest? I suggest we find out where these women went, if any of them are still alive. If we can get testimony from one of them, combined with this journal, we might have enough to bring Silas down. Abigail's mind was racing. The journal mentions transfers to Black Creek. Does that mean anything? Lucas and Reverend Whitfield exchanged another look. This time, it was the Reverend who spoke. Black Creek's an old mining camp about 40 miles north of here. Played out 5 years ago. Should be abandoned. But it's not, Lucas said. I've seen smoke coming from that direction, heard rumors of activity. Never investigated because it's not my business what happens in an abandoned mine. It's our business now. Abigail looked at each of them in turn. If there's even a chance those women are there, we have to look. It's a 2-day ride, Lucas said. Rough country. Dangerous, even without considering Silas's men might be guarding it. So we'll be careful? You're not going. I'm the only one who has nothing to lose. Grace has her restaurant. You have your ranch. Reverend Whitfield has his church. But me? I'm already dead as far as Boston's concerned. I'm already marked by Silas. What's one more risk? Lucas looked like he wanted to argue, but before he could, there were more footsteps on the stairs. These ones heavier, less cautious. The 4 of them barely had time to process the sound before the door slammed open and Wade Prescott stood in the doorway, a revolver in his hand. Behind him, 2 more men, both armed. Well, Wade said, his voice carrying the slow drawl of someone who knew he held all the cards. Looks like we got ourselves a situation. And Wade Prescott stood in the doorway like a man who'd been waiting for this moment. The revolver in his hand caught the moonlight, turning the barrel silver. Behind him, 2 more of Silas's men blocked any chance of escape. The taller one had a scar across his throat. The other was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. Lucas moved first, stepping in front of Abigail with the kind of instinct that came from a lifetime of protecting things. His hand drifted toward his own revolver, but Wade shook his head. I wouldn't, Lucas, not with 3 guns already drawn. Wade's voice was pleasant, conversational, like they were discussing the weather instead of life and death. Been a long time. What's it been, 6 years? 7, Lucas said. The word came out flat, stripped of emotion. 7 years since Fort Laramie, since you left me bleeding in that ditch while the Sioux closed in. Wade smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. I survived, in case you were wondering. Took a Sioux arrow in the shoulder and a week crawling back to friendly territory, but I survived. You deserted, Lucas said. Left your unit to die while you ran with stolen supplies. I adapted. There's a difference. Wade gestured with the revolver toward the journal still clutched in Abigail's hands. That's Silas's property. Hand it over, and maybe we can all walk away from this. Abigail felt Grace tense beside her. Reverend Whitfield had gone very still, the kind of stillness that came before violence. The air in the room felt compressed, heavy with the weight of decisions that would matter. The journal proves Silas is trafficking women, Abigail said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. It proves Malcolm was working for him. It proves murder. It proves business, Wade corrected. Supply and demand. Malcolm supplied women who were willing to work off their passage north. Silas provided opportunities. Everyone benefited, except the women. They made their choices. They made choices based on lies. Wade's smile faded. Philosophy's above my pay grade, sweetheart. The journal. Now. Lucas's hand moved so fast, Abigail almost missed it. One moment he was standing still. The next, his revolver was clearing leather, coming up in a smooth arc that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. But Wade was fast too, and he'd been expecting trouble. 2 shots cracked in the confined space, deafening. Lucas staggered back, blood blooming across his left shoulder. Wade's hat went spinning off his head. A neat hole punched through the crown where Lucas's bullet had come within an inch of ending him. The 2 men behind Wade raised their weapons, but Reverend Whitfield moved with surprising speed for a man his age. He grabbed a chair and swung it hard into the tall man's gun arm. The revolver fired wild, the bullet punching through the ceiling. Grace launched herself at the man with missing fingers, that candlestick in her hand connecting with the side of his head with a sound like a hammer hitting meat. Abigail ran. It wasn't courage. It wasn't strategy. It was pure survival instinct that sent her diving through the doorway, past Wade, who was trying to track 2 threats at once, past the fighting in the small room, down the dark staircase with the journal pressed against her chest. Behind her, she heard more gunfire, a man's cry of pain. Then Reverend Whitfield's voice, clear and strong. "Grace, the window! Go!" Another gunshot. Silence. The crash of furniture breaking. She hit the ground floor running, burst through the back door into the alley. The night air was cold, thin at this altitude, and it burned her lungs as she sprinted. She had no plan beyond getting away, getting the journal somewhere safe where Silas couldn't bury it. Footsteps pounded behind her, heavy boots on packed dirt. Abigail risked a glance back and saw the man with missing fingers. Blood ran down his face from where Grace had hit him, but he was still coming, still fast despite the blow. She cut left between buildings, her broken ribs screaming with each breath. The darkness was total here, no moon reaching into the narrow gap between structures. She felt her way forward, hands scraping against rough wood, her breath coming in ragged gasps. A hand grabbed her ankle. She went down hard, the journal flying from her grip. The man was on her in an instant, his weight crushing, his breath hot against her face. One hand found her throat, started squeezing. Abigail's vision sparkled with stars that had nothing to do with the Montana sky. Her hands scrabbled uselessly against his arm. Too weak, too small. This was how she was going to die. Not in Boston with her father's rope, not with James's fists, but here in an alley, at the hands of a man whose name she didn't even know. Then the weight disappeared. Lucas had the man by the collar, hauling him off with his good arm. Blood still poured from his shoulder wound, but he moved like he didn't feel it. He threw the man against the wall hard enough that Abigail heard ribs crack. The man tried to raise his gun, but Lucas kicked it from his hand, then drove his fist into the man's face once, twice, 3 times. Methodical, efficient, brutal. When the man stopped moving, Lucas turned to Abigail. "You hurt?" She couldn't speak yet. Her throat felt crushed. She shook her head. "Can you run?" She nodded. "Then run. My ranch, 12 miles south. Follow the river." He retrieved the journal from where it had fallen, pressed it back into her hands. "Don't stop. Don't look back. If I don't make it there by dawn, take the journal to the territorial marshal in Helena. His name's Carson. Tell him everything. You're wounded. I've been worse." He looked back toward the main street where voices were rising, men responding to the gunfire. Grace got out through the window, but the Reverend, his jaw tightened. He stayed to cover her escape, took a bullet to the chest. He was gone before I could get back to him. "Now go." Abigail went. She ran through alleys and between buildings, staying low, staying quiet. Her body protested every step. Her ribs felt like knives twisting with each breath. Her throat ached where the man had choked her. But she ran because Lucas had told her to run, and because stopping meant dying. The edge of town came up faster than she expected. One moment she was surrounded by buildings, and the next she was in open country, prairie grass whispering against her legs, the river a silver line in the starlight. She followed it south, running when she could, walking when the pain got too bad, always moving. Behind her, Copper Bend lit up like something out of a nightmare. Torches, lanterns, the sounds of men organizing, searching. Silas's men. They'd be coming. She had maybe an hour's head start, maybe less. The night stretched endless around her. Montana was different in the dark, bigger somehow, emptier, the kind of empty that made you understand how small you were, how insignificant, how easy it would be to just disappear into all that space. But Abigail had come too far to disappear now. She thought about the journal pressed against her chest, about Clara and Mary and Catherine, about Sarah Drummond, 17 years old, murdered by her own uncle, about how many more names might be added to that list if she didn't keep moving. The miles passed like fever dreams. Her legs went numb somewhere around mile 3. Her vision started playing tricks around mile 5, showing her shapes in the darkness that weren't there. Twice she fell, her body simply giving out, and twice she forced herself back to her feet. Around what she guessed was mile 8, she heard horses behind her, multiple riders moving fast. She left the river, scrambling up a small rise to where a cluster of rocks offered cover. She wedged herself between two boulders, pulled her dark skirt tight around her legs, and tried to become part of the landscape. 3 riders passed below her position. Even in the darkness, she recognized Wade Prescott's silhouette. They were following the river just as she had been. If they didn't find her soon, they'd reach Lucas's ranch first. She waited until the hoofbeats faded, then kept moving. Not along the river anymore. Cross-country now, using the stars to navigate south. It was slower, harder, but it kept her off the obvious path. Dawn was just breaking over the eastern mountains when she finally saw it. A ranch house, small but solid, with a barn and corral nearby. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant someone was there. She approached carefully, every nerve screaming that this might be a trap. But when she got close enough to see details, she recognized Lucas's horse tied at the hitching post. He'd made it. The door opened before she could knock. Lucas stood there, his left arm in a makeshift sling, fresh bandages visible under his shirt. His face was gray with pain and blood loss, but his eyes were sharp. "You made good time," he said. "Wade and 2 others are coming. They're maybe 30 minutes behind me." Lucas nodded like he'd been expecting this. "Get inside." The ranch house was small, maybe 3 rooms total. Simple furniture, clean but sparse. Everything looked like it hadn't been touched in years, preserved exactly as it had been the day Lucas's family died. A child's toy sat on a shelf. A woman's shawl draped over a chair. "How bad is the shoulder?" Abigail asked. "Bad enough. Bullet went through. Grace stitched it before I left." He moved to a gun cabinet, started pulling out weapons. 2 rifles, another revolver, a shotgun. Boxes of ammunition. "Can you shoot?" "I've never fired a gun." "Time to learn." He handed her the shotgun. "It's simple. Point it at what you want dead. Pull the trigger. The kick will knock you back, so brace yourself. You get 2 shots before you have to reload." Abigail took the weapon. It was heavier than she'd expected, cold metal and polished wood. The weight of it in her hands felt like a threshold being crossed, a line between who she'd been and who she was becoming. "They'll try to burn us out," Lucas said, checking the loads on both rifles. "Fire's Wade's favorite tactic. He used it at Fort Laramie when he couldn't win a straight fight. Then we leave." "And go where?" "Wade knows this country as well as I do. We run, we die tired." He positioned himself at the window facing north, the direction Wade would come from. "We make our stand here. 3 against 2 and you're wounded. I've faced worse odds." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "You did good getting here. The journal's safe. That's what matters. If things go bad, there's a root cellar under the kitchen. Hide there. When it's over, however it ends, take the journal to Helena. I'm not hiding while you die for me. I'm not dying for you. I'm settling a 7-year-old debt with a man who deserves killing." He turned back to the window, and maybe buying time for what's right to actually happen for once. They came as the sun cleared the mountains, 3 riders pushing their horses hard. Wade in the lead, the other 2 flanking him. They stopped about 200 yards out, just beyond effective rifle range. Smart. Wade had always been smart about staying alive. "Lucas," Wade called out. His voice carried in the morning stillness. "This doesn't have to end, Bloody. Send out the girl in the journal, and we ride away. You can go back to mourning your dead family in peace." Lucas didn't respond. He was tracking Wade through the rifle sights, waiting for the man to get cocky, to move into range. "You protecting another woman, Lucas? How'd that work out last time?" Wade's voice took on a mocking edge. "Anna was her name, wasn't it? Pretty thing. Shame about what happened to her. And little Lily. How old was she, 5, 6? Abigail felt Lucas go rigid beside her. The rifle barrel wavered slightly, then steadied. "Don't," she said quietly. "That's what he wants. He wants you angry." "I know." But Lucas's voice was ice and murder. "Doesn't make it easier to hear." Wade seemed to realize the taunting wasn't working. He conferred with his men, pointing toward the barn and the house. Then all 3 dismounted, spread out, started moving in on foot, using cover, taking their time. "Here we go," Lucas murmured. Lucas. The first shot came from the man on the left, aiming for the window where Lucas was positioned. The bullet punched through the wall 2 feet from his head, sending splinters flying. Lucas returned fire immediately, the rifle crack splitting the morning quiet. The man dropped, clutching his leg. The other man opened up with a revolver, firing rapidly as he ran toward the barn. Lucas tracked him, fired, missed. The man made it to cover behind the barn wall. Wade hadn't moved. He was watching, learning, adapting. "He's thinking," Lucas said. "Figuring angles. What do we do?" "We wait. Let him come to us." But even as Lucas said it, Abigail smelled smoke. She turned. Through the back window she could see flames licking up the side of the barn. The man who'd taken cover there must have circled around, set the fire. The barn was old, dry. It would go up fast. "They're going to burn us out," she said, "but not us, the barn. They want to limit our options, force us to focus on saving the horses or saving ourselves." "The horses. We'll die." Lucas's voice was flat. "That's the point. Wade wants me to choose, wants me to feel it." But Abigail was already moving toward the back door. "There are horses in there." "Abigail, don't." She didn't listen. She couldn't. She'd spent too many months being helpless, being the victim, being the woman who things happened to. She grabbed a bucket of water sitting near the kitchen pump, threw open the back door, and ran toward the burning barn. The heat hit her like a physical force. Flames had already engulfed one whole side of the structure, were spreading fast across the dry wood. Inside she could hear horses screaming, that high-pitched sound of animal terror. She soaked her shawl in the bucket water, wrapped it around her face, and pushed through the barn door. Smoke choked her immediately. Through the haze she could see 3 horses in stalls, panicking, throwing themselves against the wood. She made it to the first stall, threw the latch, hauled the door open. The horse bolted past her, nearly trampling her in its desperation to escape. The second horse was easier. The third had gone crazy with fear, was rearing and kicking at the stall walls. Abigail approached slowly, speaking low despite the roar of flames, despite her lungs burning, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. "Easy," she managed. "Easy now." The horse's eyes rolled white with terror, but something in her voice got through. It stilled long enough for her to reach the latch, swing the door wide. The horse charged past her, and she turned to follow. A hand grabbed her arm. The man from the barn, the one Lucas had missed. His face was soot-stained, his eyes bright with something between anger and fear. He raised his revolver, pressed it against her temple. "Drop it!" he shouted, dragging her toward the barn entrance, where Lucas could see them. "Drop your weapons, or I blow her head off." Through the smoke and flames, Abigail could see Lucas in the doorway of the ranch house. He had both rifles now, one in each hand, despite the wounded shoulder. His face was unreadable. "Don't do it," Abigail called. "He'll kill us both anyway." "Shut up," the man hissed, jamming the gun harder against her skull. Lucas set down one rifle, then the other, raised his hands. Wade Prescott emerged from cover near the corral, his revolver trained on Lucas. "That's better. Now kick the rifles away." Lucas complied. The weapon skittered across the dirt, well out of reach. "Where's the journal?" Wade asked. "Inside, on the table." "Get it. I'm not leaving her." "You don't have a choice." Wade cocked his revolver. "Get the journal, bring it here, or I shoot you and burn the house down looking for it. Either way works for me." Lucas looked at Abigail. Something passed between them in that look, some understanding that didn't need words. Then he turned and walked back into the house. The man holding Abigail relaxed fractionally, his grip loosening just enough. It was the opening she needed. She threw herself backward, driving her elbow into his ribs where Grace's candlestick had already softened him up. He grunted, his gun hand wavering. She twisted, grabbed the revolver with both hands, pushed it away from her head. It fired, the shot going wild. They struggled, his strength against her desperation, and for a moment it could have gone either way. Then the shotgun blast took him in the chest. Abigail fell backward, ears ringing. Through the smoke and shock, she saw Lucas standing in the barn doorway, the shotgun she'd left inside now in his hands. He'd circled around through the burning building, used the smoke for cover. Wade fired 3 times in rapid succession. Lucas dove behind a water trough, splinters erupting where the bullets hit. He came up with the shotgun, fired the second barrel. Wade threw himself sideways, rolled, came up behind the corral fence. For a moment there was silence, except for the roar of the barn fire. "That's 5 shots," Wade called out. "You're empty." "So are you," Lucas replied. "Unless you saved one." "Always save one." Wade stood up, his revolver pointed at Lucas over the fence. "For old friends." The rifle shot came from the direction of town. Wade jerked, looked down at the red stain spreading across his chest, then at the hills beyond. He smiled, blood on his teeth. "Huh," he said. "Didn't see that coming." He fell. Riders appeared on the ridge, 5 of them. At the lead was Marshal Henry Carson, a man Abigail had never seen but recognized from Lucas's description. Tall, weathered, with a badge catching the morning sun. Behind him rode Grace Chen, Reverend Whitfield, and 2 men Abigail didn't know. Carson dismounted, walked over to where Wade lay dying. "Wade Prescott, got a warrant for you going back 4 years, wanted for desertion, theft, and murder." He looked at Lucas. "Though I guess that warrant's not much good now." Wade tried to say something, coughed blood instead, and stopped moving. Lucas lowered the shotgun. His face was gray again, the adrenaline wearing off, the pain and blood loss catching up. "Marshal Carson, didn't expect to see you for another week at least. Got a telegram from Doc Morrison yesterday. She's been tracking disappearances for 2 years. Finally had enough to make it official." Carson looked at the burning barn, at the dead men, at Abigail standing there covered in soot and blood that wasn't hers. "Looks like we arrived just in time, or 30 seconds late," Grace said, dismounting. She went to Abigail first, checked her over with efficient hands. "You're bleeding." "It's not my blood." "You sure about that?" Abigail looked down. There was blood on her dress, her hands. Some of it probably was hers. She couldn't tell anymore. The adrenaline was leaving her system too, replaced by a trembling that started deep and worked its way out until her whole body shook. Grace put an arm around her. "You did good. You saved those horses and gave Lucas the opening he needed. You did real good." Reverend Whitfield was tending to the wounded man Lucas had shot in the leg. The man was talking, words spilling out in exchange for mercy. "Black Creek Mine, that's where they take them. Silas has a deal with the mine owners in Canada. Ships them north, sells them as workers, some for the mines, some for other things." "How many?" Carson demanded. "I don't know. Dozens, maybe more. Been going on for years." Carson looked at Lucas. "You have that journal Doc Morrison mentioned?" Lucas nodded toward the ranch house. Inside, It's got names, dates, payments, everything you need to put Silas away. Then we ride for Copper Bend. Arrest Silas before he knows we're coming. Carson gestured to his men. Get the wounded secured. We move in 10 minutes. But they didn't have 10 minutes. Smoke appeared on the northern horizon. Not the smoke of a barn fire, the smoke of many fires. Of a town burning. Carson swore. He's destroying evidence, burning anything that connects him to the trafficking. He turned to his men. Forget 10 minutes. We ride now. The next hour was chaos. They rode hard back toward Copper Bend, Carson and his men in the lead, Lucas, despite his wound, refusing to stay behind. Abigail rode with grace, clinging to the woman's back as the horse ate up miles. By the time they reached town, the damage was already done. The general store was ash. The boarding house was burning. Silas's saloon, ironically, was untouched. Its doors stood open, and inside they found him. Silas Drummond sat at his usual table, a bottle of whiskey in front of him, a revolver beside it. He looked up when Carson and the others entered, and he smiled. Marshal Carson, I heard you were coming. Silas Drummond, you're under arrest for trafficking, murder, and conspiracy. Based on what evidence? Did a little bird tell you? Silas took a drink from the bottle. Malcolm's dead. His room's burned. Any journals or papers he might have kept are ash. It's a shame. He was careless with lamps. We have the journal, Abigail said, stepping forward. Malcolm's records. Everything he did for you. Every woman. Every payment. For the first time, Silas's smile faltered. You're lying. I'm not. It's with the marshal now. Clara, Mary, Catherine, Sarah Drummond, your own niece. All of them in Malcolm's handwriting, with your name attached to every transaction. Silas's hand drifted toward the revolver on the table. Carson's men drew their weapons. Don't, Carson said quietly. It's over, Silas. You can come peaceful, or you can die here. Your choice. For a long moment Silas stared at the revolver. Then he looked at Abigail, really looked at her, and something like respect flickered in his eyes. Boston girl, didn't think you had it in you. He pushed back from the table, stood slowly. All right, Marshal. Let's do this proper. They took him outside, hands bound. The town had gathered, drawn by the fires and the presence of federal law. Faces Abigail recognized from her days washing dishes, the owner of the livery stable, the banker, the sheriff who'd looked the other way for so long. Carson addressed them all. Silas Drummond is charged with trafficking women, conspiracy to commit murder, and operating a criminal enterprise. Anyone who worked with him, anyone who knew what was happening and said nothing, you've got a choice. Come forward now, testify truthfully, and you'll be treated fair. Stay silent, and when we find the evidence that ties you to this, and you'll hang alongside him. Silence. Then the banker stepped forward. I processed the payments. Didn't know what they were for at first, but I figured it out. I can show you the books. The sheriff came next. He paid me to look the other way. I got records of the payments in my office. One by one they came forward. Not all of them. Some would run, disappear into the territories, but enough came forward to build the case Carson needed. As they led Silas toward a wagon that would take him to the territorial prison, he stopped beside Lucas. This isn't over. I've got friends. Money put away. One day I'll get out, and when you do, I'll be waiting, Lucas said. But you won't get out. Not for what you did. Not for Anna and Lily. Silas's eyes narrowed. I never touched your family. You arranged it. Everyone knows it. The Comanche who raided my ranch weren't random. They were paid, aimed. You wanted me to suffer for testifying against you. Prove it. I don't have to. You're already going to hang for the rest. Silas smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. Maybe. But you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if I did it, or if the universe just hates you. Either way, you lose. They dragged him away before Lucas could respond. The rest of the day passed in a blur of statements and questions. Carson was thorough, methodical. He interviewed everyone, documented everything. By evening, he had enough to ensure Silas would never see freedom again. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the damaged town, Lucas found Abigail sitting on the steps of the church. She still wore the blood-stained dress, still had soot in her hair. She looked exhausted and young and impossibly strong all at once. "Carson wants to leave for Black Creek at first light," Lucas said. "Raid the mine. Free whoever's still there. I'm going." "I figured you would." He sat down beside her, careful with his wounded shoulder. "You saved my life today. The horses gave me the distraction I needed. If you hadn't gone into that barn, you would have figured something else out. Maybe. Or maybe I'd be dead and Wade would have the journal." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Abigail said, "Grace told me about your wife and daughter, about what happened. I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry. Doesn't change anything." "No, but maybe it doesn't have to." She looked at him. "Silas was trying to get in your head with that last comment, about whether he arranged the attack or if it was random. You know what I think?" "What?" "I think it doesn't matter. Your family is gone either way. The question is whether you let that define the rest of your life or whether you decide to live despite it." Lucas was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Anna would have liked you. She was strong like you. Didn't take any nonsense. Lily? She was 5, loved horses, wanted to be a rancher when she grew up." He smiled, and it was the first real smile Abigail had seen from him. Small, sad, but genuine. "She would have liked you, too." The moment stretched between them, comfortable in a way Abigail hadn't expected. Then Lucas stood up. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "Lucas?" He turned back. "Thank you for standing up for me, for fighting when you could have just let Wade take the journal." "I didn't do it for you," he said, but the way he looked at her suggested otherwise. "I did it because it was right." The rest of the day passed in a blur of statements and questions. Carson was thorough, methodical. He interviewed everyone, documented everything. By evening, he had enough to ensure Silas would never see freedom again. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the damaged town, Lucas found Abigail sitting on the steps of the church. She still wore the blood-stained dress, still had soot in her hair. She looked exhausted and young, and impossibly strong all at once. "Carson wants to leave for Black Creek at first light," Lucas said. "Raid the mine. Free whoever's still there. I'm going." "I figured you would." He sat down beside her, careful with his wounded shoulder. "You saved my life today. The horses gave me the distraction I needed. If you hadn't gone into that barn, you would have figured something else out. Maybe. Or maybe I'd be dead and Wade would have the journal." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Abigail said, "Grace told me about your wife and daughter, about what happened. I'm sorry." "Everyone is sorry. Doesn't change anything." "No, but maybe it doesn't have to." She looked at him. "Silas was trying to get in your head with that last comment, about whether he arranged the attack or if it was random. You know what I think?" "What?" "I think it doesn't matter. Your family is gone either way. The question is whether you let that define the rest of your life or whether you decide to live despite it." Lucas was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Anna would have liked you. She was strong like you. Didn't take any nonsense." "Lily? She was 5, loved horses, wanted to be a rancher when she grew up." He smiled, and it was the first real smile Abigail had seen from him. Small, sad, but genuine. "She would have liked you, too." The moment stretched between them, comfortable in a way Abigail hadn't expected. Then Lucas stood up. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "Lucas?" He turned back. "Thank you for standing up for me, for fighting when you could have just let Wade take the journal." "I didn't do it for you," he said, but the way he looked at her suggested otherwise. "I did it because it was right." Dawn came cold and sharp, the kind of Montana morning that reminded you winter was waiting just beyond the horizon. Abigail woke to the sound of horses being saddled, men speaking in low voices, as they prepared for the ride to Black Creek Mine, 40 miles north through country that got rougher with every mile. She dressed quickly in the practical clothes Grace had found for her: wool pants that had belonged to Grace's late husband, a thick shirt, a coat lined with sheepskin. Not the garments of a Boston school teacher, but then again, she wasn't that woman anymore. Outside, Marshal Carson was organizing his men, 8 of them now, including 2 deputies who'd arrived during the night. Lucas stood among them, his wounded shoulder bandaged fresh, but his face showing the strain of too little sleep and too much pain. He saw Abigail and shook his head. "You're not coming. We've had this conversation, and my answer hasn't changed. Black Creek's going to be fortified, armed guards. If Silas kept women there, he didn't do it with a friendly invitation. Which is exactly why I'm coming." Abigail walked past him to where Grace was checking her horse's tack. "Those women have been through hell. When we find them, they're going to need someone who understands what that's like. Someone who isn't a man with a badge and a gun." Carson considered this. "She's got a point, Lucas. She's got a death wish. Maybe. But she's also got more courage than sense, and sometimes that's exactly what a situation needs." Carson gestured to one of his men. "Mitchell, find her a horse and a rifle. She rides with us." The journey north took all day. They followed game trails through pine forests that grew thicker and darker as they climbed. The air got thinner, colder. Snow appeared in patches, left over from early storms. By afternoon they were in a country that felt like the end of the world. Lucas rode beside Abigail for most of the trip, not speaking much, but staying close. His presence was steady, protective, without being smothering. Around mid-afternoon, when they stopped to rest the horses, he finally broke the silence. "Doc Morrison checked you over last night after you fell asleep. She said you've got 3 broken ribs that never healed right." "I'm aware. She said they were broken months ago, said whoever did it hit you more than once." Abigail didn't respond. The memory of James Hartford's fists was still too fresh, too raw. "The bruise on your face," Lucas continued, "that from the same man?" "Yes." "He your husband?" "He was supposed to be. We were engaged. Then my father died and the money disappeared, and James decided I wasn't worth the investment anymore." She adjusted her grip on the reins. "When I wouldn't help him recover his losses in other ways, he made sure I understood the consequences of disappointing him." Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "If he ever comes west, let me know." "So you can do what?" "So I can explain to him how men are supposed to treat women." The coldness in his voice suggested the explanation would involve more than words. They rode on. As evening approached, the forest gave way to rocky terrain. Ahead, carved into a hillside, Abigail could see the dark mouth of a mine entrance. Wooden structures clustered around it, half collapsed and weathered. Smoke rose from 2 of the buildings, suggesting they were occupied. Carson raised a hand, halting the group. "We approach on foot from here. Quiet. If there are guards, we take them silent if we can." They dismounted, secured the horses, and moved forward in a loose line. Carson and his deputies took point. Lucas stayed close to Abigail, his rifle ready despite the wounded shoulder. Grace brought up the rear, moving with surprising stealth for someone who spent most of her time in a kitchen. The first building they reached was a bunkhouse. Through a gap in the boards, Abigail could see 4 men inside playing cards by lamplight, all armed, all rough-looking in the way of men who made their living through violence. Carson gestured to his men. They surrounded the building, weapons drawn. Then he kicked the door open. "Federal Marshal, hands up." The men inside went for their guns. It was instinct, stupid and fatal. Carson's deputies fired first, dropping 2 of them before they cleared leather. The other 2 raised their hands. "Where are the women?" Carson demanded. "What women?" Carson shot the man in the foot. The scream echoed off the rocks, raw and primal. "I'll ask one more time. Where are the women?" "The mine," the man gasped. "Deep shaft. They're locked in the deep shaft." Carson left 2 deputies to secure the prisoners and led the rest toward the mine entrance. It yawned before them like a mouth, darkness absolute beyond the first few feet. Someone had rigged electric lights along the walls, powered by a generator that chugged somewhere deeper in. They descended. The mine was a maze of tunnels carved through rock, shored up with timbers that looked none too stable. Water dripped from the ceiling. The air smelled of earth and old fear. Every 50 feet, another electric bulb cast weak yellow light that did nothing to push back the oppressive darkness. Lucas moved ahead of Abigail now, his body between her and whatever might be waiting in the shadows. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his finger rested on the rifle trigger. This was a man who'd seen combat, who knew how to move through hostile territory. They'd descended maybe 300 feet when they heard it. Voices, women's voices, crying, pleading. Carson picked up the pace, nearly running now through the tunnels. They came around a corner and found it. A side tunnel closed off with iron bars. Beyond the bars, in a space barely 20 feet square, were 4 women. They ranged in age from maybe 16 to 30. All wore torn, dirty dresses. All looked like they'd been living in hell. When they saw the marshal's badge, one of them started sobbing. "Please," she said, "please get us out." Carson examined the lock on the bars. "I need something to break this." "Stand back," Lucas said. He aimed his rifle at the lock mechanism and fired. The lock shattered. The bars swung open. The women poured out, stumbling, clinging to each other. Abigail moved forward, instinct overriding caution. She caught the youngest one as she nearly fell, held her steady. "You're safe now," Abigail said. "We're taking you home." "Home?" The girl's voice was hollow. "I don't have a home. None of us do. That's why we came west. Then we'll find you new homes, but first we need to get out of this mine." One of the women, older than the others with gray in her hair, stepped forward. "There are more. Another shaft. Silas kept some women separate, the ones who fought too hard or knew too much." Carson's jaw tightened. "How many?" "I don't know. They took them away 2 days ago. Said they were going to the Canadian mines, but I heard the guards talking. They were going to kill them, bury them in a collapse. Make it look like an accident." "Where's this other shaft?" "Deeper. Maybe another 200 feet down." They didn't have time to be careful. If the women were still alive, every minute mattered. Carson left one deputy to escort the 4 freed women back to the surface, then pressed deeper into the mine with the rest of his men. The tunnels grew narrower here, more unstable. Timbers groaned under the weight of earth above. Twice, small cave-ins sent rock skittering down. Abigail's broken ribs screamed with every breath, but she kept moving. She hadn't come this far to turn back now. They found the second shaft behind a false wall of stacked stones. Someone had tried to hide it, make it look like just another dead end, but fresh tool marks in the rock gave it away. Carson and Lucas pulled down the stones, revealing another iron gate. This one wasn't locked. It stood open, inviting. Too inviting. "It's a trap," Lucas said. "Probably." Carson checked his revolver. "But we're going in anyway." They entered the shaft, single file, weapons ready. The electric lights ended here. They relied on lanterns now, throwing shadows that danced and twisted. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle, forcing them to brace against the walls. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into a natural cavern. And there, in the center of the space, lit by a ring of torches, stood 6 women bound to posts. Bound. Beyond them, in the shadows at the edge of the light, Abigail could see shapes. Men, waiting. "Well, Marshal Carson," a voice called from the darkness. "Right on time." A figure stepped into the light. Not Silas. Silas was in custody back in Copper Bend. This was someone else. Tall, maybe 40, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from granite and then broken a few times. He wore a suit that had once been expensive but was now travel-stained and worn. "Victor Drummond," Carson said. "Silas's brother. Should have known you'd be involved." "Family business." Victor smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. Silas might be soft, willing to work with the law when pressed, but me? I don't have his sentimentality. Let the women go. Can't do that. See, they're leverage now. You want them alive. You're going to turn around, ride back to Copper Bend, and tell everyone the mine was empty. Silas goes free. We disappear into Canada. Everyone lives. That's not happening. Then everyone dies. Victor gestured, and men emerged from the shadows. 8 of them, all armed, all positioned with clear shots at the bound women. Your choice, Marshal, justice or mercy. You can't have both. The standoff stretched. Carson's men had their weapons trained on Victor's men. Victor's men had theirs trained on the women. First person to fire would trigger a massacre. Then Abigail did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She stepped forward into the open space between the two groups. "Miss Brennan," Lucas hissed, "get back." She ignored him. She walked steadily toward the bound women, her hands visible and empty. Victor watched her approach, curious. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked. "I'm doing what men with guns never think to do. I'm making this personal." She reached the first woman, began working at the ropes, binding her. "These aren't leverage. They're not property. They're people. Sarah Drummond was people, your niece. Silas sold her, and now she's dead. Are you going to kill more of your own family's victims to save the man who murdered her?" Sarah was weak. She didn't understand the business. She was 17. Abigail moved to the second woman, untying her as well. She came to Reverend Whitfield for help because she trusted that someone would care. Your brother betrayed that trust. And you're standing here ready to kill 6 more women to protect him? They knew the risks when they came west. They knew lies. Malcolm Pritchard promised them husbands and homes. Instead, they got slavery and violence. The third woman now, her hands freed. "I came west on the same lies. The only difference between me and them is luck, and Lucas Mercer." She could feel Lucas's tension from across the cavern. Feel Carson calculating angles, trying to find a way out that didn't end in blood. Feel the weight of every gun pointed at her and the women she was freeing. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Victor said. "Good. It should be hard. Taking lives should cost you something." Fourth woman freed now. 2 more to go. "My father took his own life because he couldn't live with his failures, but at least he had the courage to pay for his mistakes himself. What you're doing, hiding behind guns and threatening innocents, that's not courage. That's cowardice." Victor's hand drifted toward his gun. "You're testing my patience. And you're proving my point." Fifth woman, 1 left. "You could let them go, right now. Let us walk out of here and maybe you and your men make it to Canada. Maybe you start over. Or you can kill us all and guarantee that every lawman in the territory hunts you until you hang." She reached the 6th woman, started working on the knots. They were tight, deliberate. Her fingers struggled with them, but she kept working, kept talking. "When I was washing dishes in Grace's restaurant, I met a woman named Doc Morrison. She told me she'd been tracking disappearances for 2 years. 23 women, Victor. That's how many your brother sold, how many you helped him sell. 23 women who came west looking for hope and found something worse than anything they'd left behind. The last knot came free. All 6 women were loose now, standing beside Abigail. She turned to face Victor, putting herself between him and them. "So here's your choice. Shoot us and become murderers everyone can see, or let us go and remain what you've always been, criminals who hide in shadows." For a long moment Victor stared at her. Then he looked at his men, at Carson's deputies, at the women clustered behind Abigail. The math was simple. They might kill the women, but they wouldn't survive the response. "Hell with it," Victor said. He lowered his gun. "They're not worth dying for. Let them go." His men hesitated, then slowly lowered their weapons. Carson didn't waste time. "Move. Everyone out. Now." They retreated through the tunnel, Carson's men covering their backs. Victor and his crew didn't follow. By the time they reached the main shaft, Abigail was shaking so hard she could barely walk. Lucas caught her arm, steadied her. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen," he said. "It worked. This time, don't ever do it again." but they both knew she would if she had to. They emerged into the night air to find it snowing, light flakes that caught the moonlight and turned the world silver. The 4 women from the first shaft were huddled around a fire, wrapped in blankets. When they saw the 6 new survivors, tears flowed freely. Doc Morrison was there, having ridden up with additional supplies. She moved among the women, checking injuries, offering water and food. Grace had set up a makeshift kitchen, cooking soup over an open fire. Abigail collapsed near the fire, her body finally giving out. The broken ribs, the exhaustion, the weight of everything that had happened in the past 3 days, all of it hit her at once. She felt Lucas sit down beside her, his presence solid and warm. "We did it," she said. "You did it. I was just there with a gun. You've been doing more than that since the moment I arrived." "Maybe." He was quiet for a moment. "Doc Morrison wants to check you over. Says you're running on nothing but stubbornness at this point." Doc Morrison's probably right. Abigail looked at the women gathered around the fire. 10 of them. 10 lives saved. But it was worth it. They spent the night at the mine, too dangerous to travel in darkness through unfamiliar terrain. In the morning, they began the long ride back to Copper Bend. The pace was slower now, accommodating the women who'd been imprisoned, some of whom could barely sit a horse. Lucas stayed close to Abigail the entire journey, not hovering, just present. She found herself grateful for it, for the steady presence of someone who understood what it meant to survive something that should have destroyed you. They reached Copper Bend as the sun set, painting the damaged town in shades of gold and crimson. The population had gathered in the street, word having spread about the rescue. Families who'd lost daughters, friends who'd wondered, even strangers who'd simply heard the story and wanted to see it end well. Doc Morrison took charge of the rescued women, shepherding them to her clinic for proper medical care. Grace opened her restaurant to feed them. Reverend Whitfield offered the church for those who needed a place to pray or simply sit in silence. Carson had Victor Drummond and his men in custody. After letting the women go, Victor had attempted to flee north toward Canada, but Carson's deputies had tracked them through the night. By dawn, they were surrounded. Victor surrendered without a fight, knowing the game was over. With Silas already imprisoned and the evidence mounting, the Drummond brothers' empire was finished. But there was still one piece of unfinished business. That evening, Carson approached Lucas and Abigail where they sat on the church steps. "Silas has been asking to see you both." "Why?" Lucas asked. "Says he wants to make a confession, specifically about Anna and Lily." Lucas went very still. Abigail felt him tense beside her, every muscle coiling. "You don't have to go," she said quietly. "Yeah, I do." The territorial prison was a temporary holding cell in the back of the sheriff's office. Silas sat on a narrow cot, his hands shackled, his expensive suit dirty and torn. When Lucas and Abigail entered, he looked up and smiled. "Lucas Mercer, and the Boston girl who brought down my operation." He gestured to the other cot. "Sit. Let's talk." "I'm not interested in conversation," Lucas said. "Carson said you wanted to confess. I wanted to tell you the truth about Anna." Silas leaned back against the wall. "I didn't arrange the Comanche raid. I didn't pay them. I didn't plan it." "You're lying." "I'm not. Think about it, Lucas. I was in prison when it happened. How could I have arranged anything?" Silas shook his head. "The truth is simpler and worse. It was random. Your wife and daughter died because the world is cruel and random and doesn't care about justice." Lucas looked like he'd been struck. "No, everyone in town says you did it. Everyone knows." "Everyone assumes, because it makes sense, doesn't it? I had motive. I had means. So naturally I must have done it." Silas leaned forward. "But I didn't. And you've spent 3 years hating me for something the universe did all on its own." "Why tell me this now?" "Because I'm going to hang. And I want you to know that your family's death is the one crime I'm not guilty of. I want you to spend the rest of your life knowing that their deaths meant nothing, had no purpose, were just bad luck and bad timing. Abigail saw Lucas's hand drift toward his revolver, saw the rage building, the need for vengeance that had kept him going for 3 years. She put her hand on his arm. "Don't," she said. "He wants you to kill him, wants you to become a murderer so he can take that with him." "Listen to the girl," Silas said. "She's smarter than she looks." Lucas's hand didn't move. For a long moment he stared at Silas, and Abigail could see the war happening behind his eyes. Justice versus vengeance. Truth versus the comfort of a simple villain. Finally, Lucas stood up. "You're right. Anna and Lily's deaths might not be your fault. But the 23 women you sold, that's all you. Sarah Drummond's death, that's you. And when they hang you for those crimes, I'll be there watching. Not because you killed my family, but because you're a monster who deserves to die." He walked out without looking back. Abigail started to follow, then paused. She looked at Silas, at the man who'd tried to destroy her before she'd even arrived in Montana. "You want to know something? You lost. Not just the trial, not just your freedom. You lost because you thought we were weak, thought we'd break. But we didn't. And that's what you'll think about every day until they hang you." Outside, she found Lucas standing in the street, his face turned toward the sky. The stars were coming out, bright and cold in the Montana night. "You believe him?" she asked. "I don't know." His voice was raw. "Part of me wants to believe that even Silas had limits. But part of me needs someone to blame, needs their deaths to mean something. They did mean something. They meant you survived. They meant you testified against Silas the first time, which led to you testifying now, which saved 10 women's lives." She moved to stand beside him. "Your family's deaths weren't justice, but what you did with your grief might be." Lucas looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. The walls he'd built, the distance he'd maintained, it all cracked just a little. "You should have left when I told you to." "Probably. Should have taken the ticket east and never looked back." "Almost certainly." "But you didn't." "No, I didn't." She met his eyes. "Because running doesn't solve anything. It just changes the location of your problems." "Is that what you learned in Boston?" "That's what I learned from you." The moment stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Then Lucas smiled, and it was genuine, warm, the kind of smile that transformed his entire face. "You're stubborn." "So I've been told. And brave. More like desperate. And beautiful." The word hung in the air, surprising them both. Abigail felt her face flush, felt something warm bloom in her chest. Lucas looked like he wanted to take it back, to retreat behind his walls, but he didn't. "I mean it," he said quietly. "You're the strongest person I've met in 3 years, maybe longer. I'm not strong, I'm just tired of being afraid." "Same thing sometimes." He took a breath, like he was preparing for battle. "Stay in Copper Bend. Not at the church. Not washing dishes. Stay with me. At the ranch. Help me rebuild what burned. Help me figure out how to live again instead of just surviving." Abigail's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment. The choice between the safe path and the uncertain one. Between going back to being who she'd been and becoming someone new. "What exactly are you asking?" "I'm asking if you'd consider becoming my wife. Not a mail-order arrangement. Not a business transaction. A real marriage, with a real future, however long that might be. Lucas, I'm damaged goods, broken ribs, broken past. I came here with 9 cents and a lie. And I'm a widower who spent 3 years talking to graves. We're both broken. Maybe that means we fit together." She thought about James Hartford and his fists, about her father and his rope, about every man who'd ever tried to own her or hurt her or reduce her to something less than human. Lucas wasn't any of those men. Lucas had stood beside her, not in front of her, had trusted her with his grief, had let her risk her life because he respected her choices. "Yes," she said. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll stay at the ranch. Yes to whatever future we can build together." Lucas pulled her close, mindful of her broken ribs and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, the kiss of two people learning how to be vulnerable again. When they broke apart, Abigail was crying, but for the first time in months they were happy tears. "We should probably tell people," Lucas said. "Probably." But they stood there a moment longer, just the two of them under the Montana stars, holding on to each other like they were the only solid things in an uncertain world. The trial took 3 weeks. Carson brought in a federal judge from Helena, a man with a reputation for being fair but unforgiving toward criminals. The evidence was overwhelming. Malcolm's journal, the testimony of the rescued women, the confession of Victor's men who'd turned state's witness. Even some of Silas's former business associates testified, trying to save themselves. Silas and Victor Drummond were both sentenced to hang. The executions were scheduled for the first week of November. Lucas and Abigail married in late October, a small ceremony at the church with just Grace, Doc Morrison, and Marshall Carson in attendance. Reverend Whitfield's seat remained empty, a silent tribute to the man who'd given his life for others. Abigail wore a simple dress that Grace had made. Lucas wore his best suit, the one he'd been married in before. He'd asked Anna's permission the night before at her grave, told her he'd always love her, but needed to learn to live again. They spent their wedding night at the ranch, in the small house that Lucas had been afraid to change for 3 years. Together, they packed away Lily's toys, carefully and reverently. They washed Anna's shawl and folded it into a trunk. They didn't erase the past, but they made room for the future. 2 weeks into their marriage, Doc Morrison came to visit with news. "I've been treating one of the rescued women," she said. "The youngest one. Name's Sarah Calloway. Turns out she's with child." Abigail's blood ran cold. "From the mine?" "From before. She came west pregnant, hoping to find a husband who'd accept her. The baby's father wanted nothing to do with either of them." Doc Morrison paused. "She's terrified. Doesn't know how she'll survive once the child is born. I was wondering if you might talk to her, woman to woman." That evening, Sarah came to the ranch. She was 16, barely more than a girl herself, with fear written across every inch of her face. Abigail sat with her, offered tea, and listened to her story. "I thought I could hide it," Sarah said. "Thought I could find a husband quickly enough that he'd believe the baby was his. But Malcolm figured it out. Said he could still sell me as labor. That's how I ended up in the mine." "What do you want to do?" Abigail asked. "I want to keep my baby, but I don't know how. I don't have money, don't have skills, can't even read properly." An idea was forming in Abigail's mind, one that felt both terrifying and right. She looked at Lucas, who'd been listening quietly from across the room. He gave the smallest nod. "Stay here," Abigail said, "at the ranch. I can teach you to read. Lucas can show you how to work with horses. When the baby comes, you'll have help." "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Abigail took the girl's hand. "I came west just like you did, looking for something better, and I found people who helped me when I had nothing. Now it's my turn to help someone else." Sarah started crying, great heaving sobs of relief. "Thank you, God, thank you." Over the winter, the ranch transformed. First came Johnny McBride. The boy appeared at their door 3 weeks after the trial, thin and hollow-eyed. His grandmother had died the previous spring, and the woman who'd been caring for him could no longer afford to feed an extra mouth. "I can work," Johnny said, his chin raised in defiance of his obvious fear. "I'm strong. I know horses. I won't be trouble." Lucas looked at Abigail. She saw the same thought reflected in his eyes. They both knew what it was like to be unwanted, to be seen as a burden. "You'll sleep in the second bedroom," Lucas said. "You'll do chores, same as anyone. And you'll go to school when Abigail opens one." "School?" Johnny's eyes widened. "Can't run a ranch if you can't read contracts," Lucas said gruffly. "Now get inside before you freeze." The boy burst into tears. Sarah moved into the spare room, the one that had been Lily's. She learned to read using Abigail's old books from Boston. She learned to cook from Grace, who visited regularly with supplies and gossip. She learned to handle horses from Lucas, who was patient and kind in ways that suggested healing was happening for him too. In early December, Doc Morrison visited again. This time, the news was for Abigail. "You're pregnant," she said simply. "About 6 weeks along, near as I can figure." Abigail sat down hard. "But I haven't. Lucas and I—" "When's the last time you were with a man?" "Boston. James Hartford. The night she'd refused to pay his debts with her body, and he'd taken what he wanted anyway. The night she'd finally gathered the courage to run." "Oh," Abigail said quietly. "Oh, no." Doc Morrison's face was kind, but serious. "You have options. This doesn't have to be a burden you carry." But Abigail was already shaking her head. She'd spent months helping Sarah prepare to become a mother. She'd seen the girl's fear transform into determination, watched her decide that the baby's origin didn't define its value. How could she do less for her own child? "Does Lucas need to know?" Doc Morrison asked. "Yes." Abigail's voice was firm. "He needs to know, all of it." That night she told him everything, about James, about the rape, about the child growing inside her that wasn't his. She watched his face as she spoke, watched emotions flicker across it, anger, pain, something that might have been grief. When she finished, Lucas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "This changes things. I know, if you want me to leave, I want you to stay." He looked at her, his gray eyes clear and certain. "The child didn't choose how it was conceived. Neither did you. But we can choose what happens next. We can choose to raise it as ours." "You'd do that? Raise another man's child?" "I raised my own child and lost her. Maybe this is a chance to do it again. Do it right. Do it with you." He took her hand. "The baby's origin doesn't matter, Abigail. What matters is that it's yours, which means it's ours." She cried then, great gulping sobs of relief and gratitude. Lucas held her through it, his arms steady and strong. "There's something else you should know," he said when she'd calmed down. "After Anna died, I swore I'd never let myself care about anyone again. Swore it was safer to be alone. But I was wrong. Being alone isn't safe. It's just slow dying. You taught me that. I didn't teach you anything. You taught me courage. You taught me that broken things can be repaired. You taught me that the future doesn't have to be defined by the past." He smiled. "And you're going to teach our child those same things." In January, Silas and Victor Drummond hanged in the center of Copper Bend. Half the territory came to watch. Lucas stood in the front row, Abigail beside him. When the trap dropped and justice was served, he didn't smile. He just nodded once, then turned and walked away. "Feel better?" Abigail asked as they rode back to the ranch. "No, but I feel finished." "That's something." In March, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Thomas, after Reverend Whitfield, who'd been killed during the confrontation at Malcolm's room. The bullet had found him in the confusion, and he'd died doing what he'd always done, helping others. In late May, Abigail went into labor. It was hard, longer than Doc Morrison liked, but both mother and child survived. A boy, dark-haired like his biological father, but with Abigail's eyes. When Doc Morrison handed him to Lucas, the cowboy stared down at the tiny face with an expression of wonder and terror. "What do we name him?" "You choose," Abigail said, exhausted but happy. Lucas thought for a long moment. Then he said, "Samuel, after my grandfather, a man who knew how to build things that lasted." "Samuel Mercer," Abigail tested the name. "I like it." The years that followed were not easy. The ranch struggled. Droughts came and went. Sarah eventually married a ranch hand from a neighboring spread and moved to her own homestead, taking young Thomas with her, but visiting often. The territory changed as more settlers arrived, as the railroad pushed through, as the wild country gradually civilized. But through it all, Lucas and Abigail built something that lasted. Not just a ranch, though it grew to 400 acres. Not just a family, though Samuel grew strong and tall. They built a partnership based on mutual respect, on shared trauma transformed into shared strength. That evening, after the boys were in bed, Lucas took Abigail's hand and led her to the cemetery where Anna and Lily rested. It was the first time they'd come here together since the wedding. "I wanted to thank them," Lucas said quietly, "for letting me go, for letting me love again. You think they understand? I think Anna would approve of you, would like how you make me laugh, how you don't let me wallow." He crouched down, brushed leaves from the markers. "And Lily would have loved having a little brother." They stood in silence for a moment, honoring the past without being trapped by it. Then they walked back to the ranch house, to the life they'd built from ashes and determination. 10 years later, on a spring morning in 1887, Abigail stood on that same porch and watched Lucas teach Samuel to ride. The boy was 9 now, fearless and kind in equal measure. Johnny, 20, was working with the horses in the corral, fearless and kind in equal measure. Johnny, 15, was working with the horses in the corral, already showing the steady competence that would serve him well as a lawman. Grace had expanded her restaurant into a small hotel. Doc Morrison had trained 3 new doctors and was semi-retired. Marshal Carson had been promoted to territorial supervisor. The rescued women from Black Creek had scattered across the West, finding husbands or building businesses or simply building lives that were their own. And Copper Bend had transformed from a town controlled by fear into a community defined by second chances. Abigail thought about the girl who'd arrived here with 9 cents and a bruised face. Thought about how that girl had believed her life was over, that she'd used up all her chances, how wrong she'd been. Because sometimes, she'd learned, the worst thing that could happen to you was the beginning of the best thing. Sometimes being broken open was the only way to let the light in. Sometimes the end of one story was just the start of another. Lucas looked up, caught her watching, and smiled. That same smile that had transformed his face years ago, now comfortable and frequent. He said something to Samuel, then walked toward the porch. "What are you thinking about?" he asked when he reached her. "Everything. Nothing. How far we've come. From 9 cents to all this." He gestured at the ranch, the mountains, the wide Montana sky. "From 9 cents to everything that matters," she corrected. He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. Behind them, the house that held their children. Before them, the land that sustained their family. Above them, the sky that stretched infinite and blue. "Worth it?" Lucas asked. "Every bit of it," Abigail replied. "Every single bit." And in that moment, standing on the porch of the ranch they'd built together, with their children playing in the yard and their future still unwritten, Abigail Brennan Mercer knew with absolute certainty that she'd finally found what she'd been looking for when she'd come west. Not a husband, not security, not even a home, though she had all those things. What she'd found was herself, the version of herself that had been buried under fear and expectation and other people's definitions. The version that was brave and strong and capable of building a life worth living. The girl from Boston was gone. In her place was a woman of Montana, a woman who'd taken 9 cents and a broken promise and turned them into a legacy. And that, more than anything, was worth the journey.